Hi there, welcome again. So I saw this beautiful dress worn by Nancy Sime. It was custom made for her by Envy the Clothier. I hope I'm saying that right. So I decided to attempt recreating it, and in this video I'll be showing you how I drafted the pattern and cut it out. And it's going to have another part where I'll share the sewing tutorial. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into the tutorial. I'll begin with the front bodice pattern. I have some lines drawn on my pattern paper already. From the top, the shoulder line, the chest line or armhole line, bust point, under bust and waistline. I have my shoulder slant and my armhole curve. All these are the basic stuff I do when I start drafting out my pattern, so I don't want to keep repeating them in all my videos. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to mark my neck depth. So this is where my dress is going to start from. And from the shoulder line, I'm marking down 7 inches. If you want yours lower, you can go ahead and mark 8 or 9 inches. If you want yours higher, go ahead and mark above 7 inches. And I'm going to go ahead and mark the bust span measurement divided by 2 on all these lines: the neck depth, the chest line, bust point, under bust and waistline. Now moving to the waistline, where I've just drawn out the bust span measurement line, I'll go ahead and mark the value for my waist dart, and I'm using 0.6 inches. So I'm going to mark 0.6 inches on both sides of this bust span line here. Next, I'll move over to the under bust line so that I can do a little under bust tightening right there. Now I'm just going to explain the little calculation I do to get the value for my under bust dart or for my under bust tightening. So for that, I divide my bust circumference measurement by 4 and under bust circumference measurement by 4 as well, and then I subtract the value I have from the division, subtract it from each other, and that's what I use to have my under bust tightening. So let's just do it together. My bust circumference is 39 inches divided by 4 is 9.75. My under bust is 32 divided by 4 is 8 inches. Now 9.75 minus 8 inches is 1.75 inches. So this is the value for my under bust tightening. This is how I do mine. Now I'll take this figure I have here and divide it again, but this time not equally. You know that there are two sides to this dart line, the center front and the side front. So I'm going to divide this figure I have such a way that one of the figures is going to be smaller than the other one. So the figure that will be marked toward the center front is going to be smaller than the figure that will be marked toward the side front. Now for this, my calculation, I have 1.75 inches. I'm going to divide it that the figure that will be marked toward the center will be 0.6 inches, and toward the side I'm going to have 1.15 inches. And if I add 1.15 and 0.6, I still have 1.75 inches. So my under bust line, I'm going to mark toward the center 0.6 inches, and toward the side I'm going to mark 1.15 inches. That's just between 1.1 and 1.25. I'm just going to find a space there and mark 1.15. You can decide to approximate yours if you want. So let's just do another one. In case your bust circumference is 40 inches and your under bust is 32 inches, 40 divided by 4 is 10. 32 divided by 4 is 8. Now 10 minus 8 is 2 inches. So 2 inches is the value for your under bust tightening. Now for you to separate this to the center front and side front, you're just going to decide how small you want your center front to be. But for this, we're just going to use 1.25 inches for the side and 0.75 inches for the center. So if you add 1.25 and 0.75, you have 2 inches. Let's do one more again before we proceed. So assuming your bust circumference is 34 inches and your under bust circumference is 28 inches. Now 34 divided by 4 is 8.5 inches and 28 divided by 4 is 7 inches. So 8.5 inches minus 7 inches, you have 1.5 inches. Now you go ahead and further divide it to the two sides of the dart line. So toward the center, you're going to have 0.5 inches, and toward the side, you're going to mark 1 inch. So when you add 1 inch and 0.5 inches, it adds up to 1.5 inches, which is the value for your under bust tightening. Okay, so what I calculated for mine is 0.6 and 1.15, which is what I've marked on my under bust line. I really hope you understand what I've done here so far. Please do want to go over it again if you don't get it, and I promise you will. Now moving on, I'll go ahead and connect the dart points together from the waist up to the under bust, and then from the under bust to the bust point, I'm going to use a slight curve to just blend that in, because you know that's where the babies are going to sit, so it has to be well rounded. Now moving over to the neck depth, I'm going to go ahead and do a little over bust tightening here. This is a strapless dress and I don't want it to start falling or be saggy around the bust area. So I'm just going to tighten the over bust by 1 inch. I just marked 0.5 inches on both sides of that dart line, and I'll also use a very nice smooth curve to blend it from the bust point to the neck depth. Now, and I like my curve to have a smooth progression from at least 1 inch below the bust point and then going up, just blending smoothly to get to the chest line or the neck depth where I'm doing the over bust tightening. So everything just blends out very nicely. I hope you get what I mean. So this is the little over bust tightening I have done here. Now I'll proceed to mark the horizontal measurements. So on my chest line, I'm marking my bust circumference divided by 4, and I'll replace that over bust dart, which is 1 inch, and then I'll move over to my waistline. I used to skip my bust point and under bust. It doesn't make any difference for me whether I mark it or not. It just makes my lines crooked on the paper. So on the waistline, I've marked my waist circumference divided by 4. I've replaced the dart intake there, and I'm going to connect from the chest line down to the waistline, and then I'll go ahead and add 1.25 inches for my side seam sewing allowance. Now I'm done with that, I'll go ahead and mark my bust dart or side dart. So on the bust point line by the side, I'm going to mark the value for my side dart, which is 1.5 inches. I get this by subtracting my front shoulder to waist from my back shoulder to waist. So my front shoulder to waist is 17 inches and my back shoulder to waist is 15.5 inches. So 17 minus 15.5 is 1.5 inches. So this is how I get the value for my side dart. So placing the tape on my bust point line, just right there on the side seam, I'm going to mark down 1.5 inches and slant this to meet where all the other darts are meeting at the bust apex. So this is my side dart right here. Now I'll move over to the neck depth line so that I can make that little wavy design that is around the chest area. So you know that the neck depth is 7 inches. So below the neck depth, I'll go down by 1 inch. This is going to be the final depth of the design. So if you don't mind yours going below the actual neck depth you have marked, you can just do it this way. So you have to be careful with this because it's still going to go a little bit lower. So you can mark yours 6 inches so that the other depth of the sharp edges is going to go a little below 6 inches. So I'm just trying to determine how I'm going to curve this out. There's no particular measurements I use, so you can just freestyle with it, but make sure you close your darts so that you can draw out a nice curve, because by the time you're done and you cut out your darts, you might have some issues around the neckline there. So you close your darts, confirm all your curves and all your lines before you cut everything out. So this is it for the front bodice. I'm going to leave it for now and go ahead and draft out the back bodice. So on the fresh side of the paper, I have my starting line at the top, and from there I'm going to mark down my chest line, which is 8 inches. So from my shoulder down to 8 inches is my chest line point. I'll mark that and I'm going to draw a straight line across. Next, I'm going to mark half of my shoulder width measurement on the starting line, which is the shoulder line, and I'm also going to mark that on the chest line. So my shoulder to shoulder measurement is 15 inches. 15 divided by 2 is 7.5. Now at the center back, which is the edge there is no zipper allowance because it has corset loops at the back, so there's no need for a zipper allowance. Now on the shoulder line, I just marked down 1 inch, and I'm using a guide of 3 inches neck width to slant my shoulder slant. So I'm just going to slant this down to the 1 inch I marked below the shoulder line, and I'll connect from the shoulder line down to the chest line. I'll take the measurement from the shoulder slant down to the chest line and mark the midpoint, and I'm going to go inwards by 0.75 inches. On this chest line, I'm marking the bust circumference divided by 4. Bringing in my curve ruler, I'll connect from the 1 inch shoulder slant to the 0.5 inches inwards, and then meeting at the bust circumference measurement, which is on the chest line, to have my armhole curve basically. Next, I'm going to mark my shoulder to waistline, which is 15.5 inches for the back. In front was 17 inches if you remember. I'm just going to draw a straight line across. So from the top, I have my shoulder line, I have my chest line or armhole line, and I have my waistline. The back is pretty basic and simple, no much stress. Now, you know, for the front pattern, I used 7 inches as the neck depth, but for the back, I'm going to stick with the chest line as the neck depth for the back. So I'm sticking with 8 inches as the neck depth. So from the center back, I just marked inwards the bust span measurement divided by 2, which is 4 inches. I marked that on the chest line and on the waistline. On the waistline, I'm going to go ahead and mark the value for my waist dart, which is 0.5 inches. You know, in front, I use 0.6, but behind, I'm sticking with 0.5. Now, Now proceed to mark the bust circumference measurement divided by 4 on this chest line, and I'm adding 1.25 inches for sewing allowance. On the waistline, I'm marking the waist divided by 4. I'll replace the dart intake of 1 inch and I'm going to add 1.25 for sewing allowance. I'll connect from chest line down to the waistline with a straight line, just this way. So now for the back pattern, we're only going to work with the chest line down to the waistline, so just this little box here. The rest of the other parts are going to be cut off completely. Now moving to the center back, I'm going to go inwards by half an inch and slant this up to the neck point. So I'm reducing the center back by half an inch just to take off a little bulge, and then I'm also going to mark upwards half an inch, still on the waistline. I'm going to go upwards by half inch and I'll slant this inwards to a little after this dart right here. So just going this way to blend with the rest of the waistline, and all these excesses are going to be cut off completely. Now move on to cinch the waistline for the front and the back pattern. So here you're going to determine how snatched you want your waist to be, or how much you want to cinch your waist by. And I'm going to snatch my waist by 2 inches. So I'm going to divide 2 inches to cater to all 4 sides of the bodice. So you know the front part has 2 sides and then the back part has 2 sides, which are the left and the right. So I'm going to take this 2 inches and divide by 4, and I have 0.5 inches. Now you can decide to cinch your waist by 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 or even 6 inches. It depends on how snatched you want your corset to be. But for me, I'm just going to stick with 2 inches because I don't want too much stress. So I'll take this 0.5 inches and separate it to all the 4 parts of the front. So one part of the front is taking 0.5, the other part 0.5, one part of the back 0.5, the other part 0.5. When this all comes together, I have cinched 2 inches off of my waist. So I'll go ahead and take this 0.5 inches and divide it by 2 and mark it on both sides of the dart on the waistline. Now you can decide to take off the entire 0.5 inches from the side seam. So on the waistline of the side seam, you mark inward 0.5 inches and slant this upwards. Or you can decide to have another panel line, and for that you measure from the dart leg on your waistline to the side seam, divide that into 2 and just draw a new line upwards to the chest. So from here you're going to divide that 0.5 into 2 and mark on the 2 sides of the new panel line. And if you do this, you're going to have 3 pieces to one side of the front and 3 pieces to the other side of the front, making 6 pieces in total. But for me, I'm just going to take off the 0.5 inches from the dart leg on the waistline. So I'm marking 0.25 inches one side and 0.25 inches on the other side, and I'm slanting this up to the under bust line. So this is where I have taken off the 0.5 inches for the front, for half of the front. So you know that this front piece is assumed to be on a fold, so 1 inch is gone. And now for the other 1 inch, which we are going to work with 0.5 because this is half of the back, I'm going to take it off from the waistline as well. So I'm taking off 0.25 from one side of the dart and 0.25 from the other side of the dart, and I'm slanting this up to the chest line. So you can decide to just take it in from the side seam on the waistline, or you can also decide to have another panel on this back piece as well if you want. Now before I proceed to cut out the patterns, I'm just going to reduce my center back by about 0.5 inches. So I want to have a little center back opening so that by the time I snatch my corset, I don't have one overlapping on the other, so there is space for 2 of them to just sit comfortably and not be on top of the other. Do you understand? So I just went inwards by 0.5 inches from the chest line down to the waistline, and then I'm going to cut that off completely. So I was just marking where my loops are going to be, and now I can proceed to cut out my pattern. So for the front pattern, I want the side dart to be closed on paper because I don't want to sew it on the fabric. I just cut through the bust point line, stopping at the bust apex, and I place the paper over the side dart, covering it completely. I use my sellotape to seal it, and then I'll just go ahead and replace the shortage on the side, or draw out the lines properly on the side so that I don't have any shortage when I'm done. And I'm going to continue cutting out everything. Please pay attention to what I'm cutting out. Thank you. are the front pieces cut out here. The center front is going to be cut on fold, while the side front is going to be cut out as two separate pieces. And now for the back, I almost forgot to cut off the back dart, but this is me cutting it off here. So I have the center back, which is going to be cut out as two separate pieces, and the side back also as two separate pieces. Now I'll go ahead and draft out our skirt patterns. So for the front skirt pattern, I have my paper here. You can decide to just do this directly on your fabric, but I did this on paper because it is much easier to explain this way. So from the top, I just drew out a 0.5 inches starting line, which is also going to serve as the waistline. So from there, I just marked my waist to hip, which is 8 inches, and now I just marked my waist to knee, which is 21 inches. Now moving back to the waistline, I'm going to mark the dart, which is 4 inches. So take note that this is the center front. So I've just marked the bust span measurement divided by 2, which is 4 inches from the center front inwards. Now the length of the dart I used here is 4 inches, which is wrong. I wanted to just try something out, but I changed it eventually. We're going to see that much later. So the value for my waist dart is 0.6 inches. If you remember, this was exactly what I used for the front waist dart. So I'm going to slant this upwards like a V, and then you remember that I did a little waist cinching of 0.5 inches. So the way I marked 0.25 inches on both sides of the dart line for the bodice, that's just exactly what I have done here for the skirt. So now I'm going to go ahead and mark the waist circumference divided by 4, which is 8 inches. I'll replace the entire dart intake on the side, and then I'll go ahead and mark 1.25 inches. So you're supposed to replace only the dart intake 0.6 plus 0.6. You're not including the ½ inch for the waist cinching. So I've just marked my hip circumference measurements divided by 4, and I've added allowance, and the entire thing I marked on my hip, I just picked it up and marked it on my knee, and I'm going to subtract 1.5 inches. So this is going to give me a very nice pencil shape. Now I'll go ahead and connect from my waist to hip and from my hip down to the knee. Now moving back to the waistline, I don't want to have this dart sewn on my fabric, so I'm going to eliminate the dart from the side. So I'm just going to measure the entire value for the dart I have here. I'm going to take it inwards on the side of the waistline. So I'll go ahead and draw out a new waist to hip side curve. But now to know where the curve is going to end, I'm going to measure the same dart length, and I'll mark that on the side seam, and I'll go ahead and bring in my curve ruler. So when I was trying to connect from the waist to hip, meeting at the 4 inches dart length was going to give a very weird shape. So I just went ahead and took it down to about 7 inches. So you can see how it has blended nicely. Now moving back to the knee, I'm just going to take what I have on the knee straight down to the end of the skirt. So the skirt length is actually 43 inches. This is where my paper stops. So I'm going to add the extra length when I'm cutting it out on the fabric. So what I have here is 26.5. I'll go on to draft out the back pattern. So bringing in my pattern paper again, I have my waistline, hip line, and knee line. Moving to the waist, I'm going to go ahead and mark in my zipper allowance. So for the skirt, I'm going to have a zipper. I'm making use of a 1.25 inches zipper allowance, and I've just drawn that out. So from the zipper allowance starting point, I'm going to measure in 4 inches, which is half of my bust span measurement, and on both sides of that point I've marked 0.5 inches because that is my dart intake for the back. Now the length of the dart, instead of using 4 inches like I did for the front, let's do it right this time. I used 7 inches as the dart length. Now remember that we also snatched 0.5 inches from the waistline of the back bodice, so I'm going to also do that to the waist of the back skirt. So I've just marked 0.25 inches on both sides of the dart line and slanted it downwards. Now I'll mark the waist circumference divided by 4, which is 8 inches. I'll replace the dart intake I have there, and I'm going to add 1.25 inches for sewing allowance. On the hip line, I'll mark the hip circumference divided by 4 and add 1.25 inches for sewing allowance. I'll take what I have on the hip line, including the allowance, and then I'm going to subtract 1.5 inches so that I can have a penciled effect. I'm going to connect from waist to hip and from hip to knee. And just like I did for the front skirt pattern, I don't want to have this dart sewn on the fabric, so I'm going to eliminate that from the side. So I've just measured inwards the dart value, and I'm going to slant this downward to the dart length, which is 7 inches. So you see how 7 inches just blends nicely. So I'll place my curve and just draw out a nice smooth curve this way from waist blending into the hip. I'm just going to bring in the front pattern so that I make sure that the curves align on the side, so that when I am sewing, I don't have any issues with my joining. Now go ahead and continue from the knee straight down to the full length. I just stopped where the paper stops here. And I'm just going to head over to the center back where I have the zipper allowance. On the waistline, I'll go in by half an inch. Remember that my zipper allowance is 1.25 inches. So on the waistline, I'm going inwards by half an inch, and I'm just going to slant this down to 1 inch above the hip line. And then I'm going to go down from the hip line as well by 1 inch also. So just pay attention to what I'm doing. I'm slanting the half inch inwards on the waist to the 1 inch above the hip, and I'm slanting the 1 inch below the hip into the knee line. All this is happening in the zipper allowance space. So this excess that I have slanted is going to be cut off in some areas. You see that when I'm cutting it out. Now I'm back to this waistline. I'm also going to go downwards by half an inch and slant this to blend with the rest of the waistline. Then I'll go ahead and cut it off. So please watch what I'm cutting off. This is going to cater to the zipper bulge. The half inch I went inwards and downwards by on the waistline, cater to the zipper bulge, and then the 1 inch I went above and below the hip line is going to give room for a little butt contour. So these are all the pieces I've cut out, my front and back skirt pieces and my front and back bodice pieces. I'm not going to continue with the rest of the tutorial here because this video is already too long. Please do well to watch the next part, which is going to contain the sewing tutorial. And thank you so much for watching up to this point. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye for now.